So let me tell you how Chinese propaganda actually worked. I very often speak about Chinese soft power. In fact, it's a main segment on our weekly live show. And this is where we talk about how China tries to change your mind. And it's usually through news articles, puff pieces that they put out there. They often have these big promotions on how their infrastructure is growing and just how advanced the technology is in China and just how great China is in certain fields and these amazing achievements that China has managed to pull off, which, I'll be completely honest with you, in a lot of the cases, it is incredibly impressive what China's managed to do. There are, of course, costs that are involved in being able to, for instance, build a massive high-speed rail network in a very short period of time, but that's not what this video is about. I would like to talk about a few instances where Chinese soft power has actually worked and managed to trick the vast majority of the world. I'd like to start with the whole idea behind green energy. Now, China, as we all know, has been putting a lot of time and resources and a lot of money into building green renewable energy and infrastructure. Things like wind turbines, which you do see all over China, massive solar farms, electric vehicles, electric buses in the cities, electric taxis, and they've been very successful in rolling these out. I was very impressed myself living in China, being able to take an electric taxi. In fact, here's some footage of me taking an electric taxi many years ago.
Yeah, 很好, 很好. This is Shenzhen's new electric taxi.
深圳出的。
对对，深圳出的。
深圳比亚迪啊。BYD.
BYD 对。非常好，非常好。
They were able to roll out very quickly and very efficiently an entire fleet of electric buses in Shenzhen, for instance, and then in other parts of the country too. Of course, there were fires, there were failures, there were a lot of lessons to be learned, but at the same time, they still managed to do it. What most people have lost sight of, though, is that just because China invests a lot of time, money, and energy into all of these renewable energy projects, it doesn't mean that they have stopped using fossil fuels and, in fact, increasing their reliance on coal-burning energy, for instance. In fact, it's only just gone up and up and up. China plans to build a massive amount of new coal-burning power plants, and their CO2 emissions just keep increasing year after year. So while they do have these fairly impressive renewable energy things which you can point to and say, wow, look at that, a big solar farm. Well, guess what? The power that was used to build that solar farm created a huge amount of pollution, and on top of that, they're still increasing their dependency on coal-fired power plants, etc. So the idea that because they've built some renewable energy suddenly means that they're actually starting to improve and get better for the environment and help the environment is a big lie. In fact, it's only getting worse. You may have also heard about how they're planting so many trees in desert areas and keep planting new trees everywhere, and it sounds like a fantastic idea, but unfortunately, it's not being implemented very well because they are doing what's called monoculture. They plant a certain type of tree. It actually ends up being quite devastating for the local areas where they plant it because the trees use up too much of the groundwater, and it in fact has the reverse effect and ends up being bad for the environment in the local areas in many of these cases. So when you hear about these far-flung ideas of all this great sort of green technology and all of this, you must understand that for every success China has in green technology and renewable energy, it comes at a massive cost to the environment. The second thing I'd like to talk about is, of course, COVID-19. China has very successfully managed to muddy the waters from the get-go. When the very obvious questions that should have been asked about where the COVID-19 virus came from and how it managed to spread should have been very easy to answer, and if it had been answered, it would have been much easier to contain and also prevent any future outbreaks like this happening. Well, I mean, they decided that they'd point the finger everywhere else other than the very obvious answer that it came from the lab that was studying those types of viruses and manipulating those types of viruses with gain of function, etc. in the city where the outbreak occurred. Rather than looking at that, all of a sudden it came from Italy, or it came from India, or it came from the USA, or it came from somewhere else. It's always came from somewhere else. And all of a sudden, it's not transmitted human to human, but now it is. And now it's transmitted by frozen seafood or clothing, or you get the idea. They muddied the waters so much that right now, the majority of the population of China itself believes that COVID is an imported virus that came from the outside world and did not originate from China in the first place. And everybody else around the world, of course, probably knows that it came from China originally, but it's gotten to the point where it's so difficult to pinpoint exactly how and where that most people are just like, oh, okay, whatever. And so the end result that we see here is that China has managed to successfully wash its hands of any of the blame or responsibility of this outbreak happening in the first place. The third and final thing I'd like to talk about in this video as far as soft power is concerned is that the Chinese government, the CCP itself, has managed to convince the broader outside world that there is no difference between Chinese people and the Communist Party of China and the country itself. In fact, not only Chinese people, but Asian people in general. You see, the Chinese Communist Party is quite smart in this regard. They have now made it that if you criticize the government of China, any of the things that they do, any of the terrible human rights atrocities or any of the missteps and bad policies that they have in place, if you criticize the Chinese government, all of a sudden you're racist towards Chinese people. If you were to, for instance, try to blame the Chinese government for covering up the spread of COVID and the fact that they knew that it was human-to-human transmission, but were telling the WHO and the rest of the world that it wasn't, if you try to point that out, people will start to say that you're trying to exacerbate anti-Asian hate, for instance, or that you are somehow racist towards Chinese people or Asian people in general. This has been very effective, and they've managed to pull this off for the longest time. The fact of the matter is that the Chinese government has managed to co-opt the majority of the anti-Asian hate movement, where China itself, the CCP itself, is probably the most anti-Asian organization in the world. They constantly, on a daily basis, put out TV shows and news articles blaming Japan for something or other, fostering anti-Japanese hatred. They encourage the boycotting and the destruction of Korean stores or, boycotting of Korean businesses and so on if there's anything going on in South Korea when it comes to the United States. They very much have a dislike for any other Asian country other than China. I'm talking about the CCP here. As they paint themselves as some sort of a master race, the Han majority within China is somehow superior to everybody else around them. They are the center of the universe. If you've lived there long enough, you will know. There's a massive othering effect. It's either you're Chinese or you're a foreigner. But the fact of the matter is, the CCP is incredibly discriminatory towards anyone of a different race and anyone of a different nationality. So don't buy this garbage that people try to feed you. If you have an issue with what the Chinese government is doing, it does not make you racist against Chinese people. If you have a problem with what's happening in China itself, it doesn't make you racist against Chinese people. People and a government are not the same thing. People and a country are not even the same thing. And there's no way that Chinese people are the CCP or that the CCP are Chinese people. It's a government, for goodness sake. So those are 3 of the very effective soft power campaigns coming out of China. And I think they have managed to pull it off pretty well, wouldn't you say? Anyway, until next time, we'll be keeping a close eye on this. And if you want to keep yourself in the know and in the loop, don't forget to check out our podcast every week. Well, it's more of a live show / podcast, ADV Podcast, link below. Can't wait to see you in the next one. And until then, you know the drill. As always, stay awesome.